I should have known better than to expect this dinner would be different. But hope's a stubborn thing, especially when it's tied to your daughter. Isla had always been vibrant, sharp-tongued in the way kids are when they're testing their reflection in the world. But lately, her edge had turned cold. Dorian's presence in her life had changed her. Not all at once, but gradually, like dye leaking into clear water until nothing familiar remained. Still, I picked her up from campus, complimented her new twist-out curl she didn't even acknowledge, and drove us to a small Italian place just off Fairmont and Pine, where the noise was soft and the bread was warm. We sat across from each other, the candlelight flickering just enough to throw shadows across her face. She looked so much like her mother it startled me sometimes. Same high cheekbones, same calculated pause before speaking. For the first 15 minutes, I let her talk uninterrupted. Milan, Versace, the art of brand curation, whatever that meant now. I nodded when appropriate, smiled where I could, and sipped my water with the rhythm of a man trying to keep the peace. She took a picture of her plate before touching it, adjusting the angles, flipping her phone to portrait mode. She didn't ask if I wanted to be in it. She never does. I watched her scroll through filters, then laughed softly at something someone messaged her. I tried to redirect. So, any thoughts on the internship we discussed last month? The green energy startup near your school, Dad? She cut me off, her tone syrupy with dismissal. I told you I don't want to work for some eco-nerd company with recycled laptops and like beanbags in place of chairs. I laughed gently, mostly out of discomfort. You might be surprised. That startup's valuation just hit $60 million. She rolled her eyes. Yeah, but Mom says exposure is more important than experience. Dorian's assistant said the same. There it was again. Dorian. I swallowed a dry chunk of bread. Exposure doesn't pay rent, Isla. She lifted her fork slowly, twisting it in the pasta like a conductor drawing out the last notes of a song, then looked right at me. Her voice dropped to that perfect pitch, the one meant for cutting, not clarity. At least Mom's new husband isn't a poor loser like you. The fork hung in the air for a beat too long. I didn't flinch. I didn't breathe. The clink of silverware from the other tables continued like background percussion, but something in me collapsed so quietly it didn't even make a sound. The waiter, a thin man with a tattoo of Saturn peeking out of his sleeve, froze mid-step near our table. The couple beside us stiffened. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scold her. That would have given her the audience she wanted, or worse, the ammunition to claim I was unstable or bitter. I reached calmly for my wallet, pulled out my card, and waved the waiter over without breaking eye contact with my daughter. She looked surprised. Maybe she expected outrage. Maybe she expected a scene. The bill came. I paid. No dessert. No more conversation. She offered nothing, not even a fake apology. As we walked back to her dorm, the silence between us swelled until it could have swallowed a city block. She tapped away on her phone most of the walk, unfazed, probably updating some caption or sending a filtered version of the night to her curated circle of people who wouldn't know or care what had really just happened. I stole glances at her, the slope of her shoulders, the quiet confidence in her steps, and I didn't recognize her. Or maybe I just didn't recognize who I'd let her become. When we got to her building, she gave a distracted hug. It was more of a pat. Really, like she was checking a box. Thanks for dinner, Dad, she said, eyes still on her screen. I nodded. Didn't trust myself to say much else. I watched her disappear behind the glass doors, swallowed by the lights of a campus that didn't need me. Then I turned, walked back to the car, and drove home with a silence heavier than steel. Every streetlight flicked past like a judgment. Every memory I'd buried for the sake of peace floated up in that drive. Every birthday party I paid for where she clung to Marissa's side and ignored me. Every trip I planned that was too boring or too basic. Every time Dorian got mentioned like he was some sort of lifestyle upgrade. It wasn't just the insult. It was the accumulation. 1,000 small stabs disguised as jokes. Irritation and cold silences. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my hands were trembling on the wheel. Not from anger, but from clarity. This wasn't about her words. It was about my years of silence, about thinking that love meant never pushing back, never drawing a line. I sat in the dark for a long time after I killed the engine. The green glow of the dashboard cast faint shadows across my empty passenger seat. My phone buzzed once, probably a group promo or bank notification. Ella didn't text. She didn't call, but I didn't expect her to. I leaned back, stared at the roof of the car, and let the moment settle. That fork hadn't just frozen the table. It had snapped something in me clean. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was ready to be more than a background dad, more than the silent ATM. I was ready to remind her what love with boundaries looked like. And it wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be cruel, but it would be unmistakable. Because respect isn't optional just because I'm her father. And love without dignity isn't love at all. By morning, the sting had crystallized into something sharper. Not grief, not sadness, but resolve. I sat at the edge of my bed, the sunlight barely cracking through the blinds, staring at the old framed photo of Isla on my dresser, the one from her 7th birthday, when she insisted on wearing a superhero cape over her princess dress. Back then, she looked at me like I could fix anything. Now she looked at me like I was the inconvenience in her highlight reel. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was finished playing the faceless wallet. The background noise in her designer narrative. I picked up my phone, heart calm, mind focused, and called the bank. I didn't raise my voice or ask questions. I gave them my ID number, confirmed my identity, and requested immediate cancellation of Isla's student card. No need for ceremony, just a decisive click that cut the fuel line to her extravagance. The tuition payment, I didn't cancel it. I froze it. A legal nuance that mattered. I wasn't sabotaging her education. I was pausing it, pressing hold until the character of the student matched the size of the investment. Afterward, I stood in the hallway of my house, staring at the keyhook where the spare Audi fob still hung. The car, her precious, sleek, cherry red Audi coupe, had been a graduation gift, my savings, a reward for surviving high school with decent grades and her mother's chaos. At the time, I thought it was the right move, a gesture of trust. But all I'd really done was give her a throne she now used to mock me from. I grabbed the keys. The drive to her campus was quiet, uneventful. No calls, no signs, just me, my thoughts, and a growing calm that I hadn't felt in years. When I pulled into the university lot, I spotted the car immediately. Sparkling under the morning sun like a monument to misplaced affection. No one was around. The students must have still been in classes or asleep. I approached with slow steps, pressed the unlock button, and slid into the driver's seat. The interior smelled like a perfume. I didn't recognize something expensive and clinical. There was a Balenciaga tote tossed carelessly on the passenger floor, a half-empty water bottle in the cup holder, and a used lip gloss on the dash. A snapshot of a curated life now interrupted. I adjusted the seat, turned the key, and drove away. I didn't speed. I didn't gloat. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I just headed home with the same silence she'd driven into my life months ago. By noon, the car was parked in my garage. He's tucked into the drawer beneath the utility sink and a tarp pulled neatly over the hood. I stood there a moment longer, my hand resting on the fabric, feeling like I had just sealed up something bigger than metal and rubber. I had taken back something that had started to define the power imbalance between us. Not for revenge, not for punishment, but for clarity. Back inside, I brewed a pot of coffee and sat down with my laptop. I logged into her school portal, reviewed the tuition summary, and set the freeze into official motion. My name was on the financial account, my bank, my funds. I hadn't needed permission to pay. I didn't need permission to pause. It was past 1 p.m. when I finally settled into the couch. I wasn't watching the clock. I knew the explosion would come, but I also knew it wouldn't be immediate. No, Isla wouldn't notice right away. She never checked her balances. She didn't need to. Things had always just worked. There'd be a cafe run, a card decline, then confusion, then panic, and that's when the wake-up call would begin. The hours passed slowly. I fixed a loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen. I vacuumed the floor. I even cleaned out the fridge, not because I was nervous, but because I felt like I'd reclaimed some space in my own life that I hadn't touched in years. That cabinet, I hadn't opened it in 6 months. That fridge, it was full of takeout containers I'd bought for weekends she rarely showed up for. Every corner I cleaned felt like a piece of myself coming back. By mid-afternoon, my phone vibrated once, then twice. I ignored it. At 3:15 p.m., an email ping. University Billing Department. Isla's payment had been returned due to administrative hold. I imagined her seeing the notification on her app, fingers fumbling as the screen told her she'd been locked out of the financial cocoon. At 3:47 p.m., the text began, "Dad, something's wrong with my card. Did the bank mess up? Then also, the car is gone. Was it towed?" Then a single angry question mark. I didn't respond. At 4:50 p.m., another message. "Okay, not funny. Call me now." Still nothing. By the time I heard the knock at my door, 5:42 p.m. sharp, I wasn't surprised to see silence stretching out longer than usual. But I didn't answer. I just stared through the peephole at the empty porch, wondering if it was just some delivery or a neighbor, maybe even her. But she wouldn't come all the way home, not without backup, not without spinning the story to someone first. And I was right. At 5:59 p.m., a new message came in from Marissa. What did you do? I smiled faintly because it was never what did she say. Or what happened. No, just a knee-jerk defense of the child she'd molded into a mirror. The same child who'd called me a loser in public without flinching. I locked my phone, sat back. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to cry. I had acted decisively, calmly. She had no funds, no car, no free ride. And for the first time in a long time, I had peace. Not because I punished her, but because I stopped punishing myself by allowing it. By 6 p.m., the storm arrived. It started with Isla's name flashing across my phone screen. I didn't move to answer. I just let it buzz in my hand, watching her name vibrate against the silence of the living room. The ring ended, then immediately, another call, another buzz, same number, same panic. That told me everything I needed to know. She was spiraling. I set the phone down on the coffee table and walked into the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. The sound of the faucet was oddly grounding. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was the one chasing understanding. She was. When I came back to the couch, the missed call icon was blinking. 2 voicemails, then 3. By the 4th, her voice was no longer angry. It cracked, wobbly, confused, a little scared. Dad, please call me back. I don't know what's going on. My card didn't work at the store and then I got a notice from campus about my tuition and the car. I don't know where the car is. Did you move it? Did something happen? She tried to control the pitch in her voice, but I could hear the unraveling, that desperate edge that sets in when the script you've lived by suddenly disappears. She wasn't used to this feeling, helplessness. I hadn't let her experience it before. That was on me. I let the message finish. Then another one began. This time the tone shifted. I can't believe you'd do this. Are you trying to ruin my life? What the hell, Dad? You can't just pull everything like that. I smiled, but there was no joy in it. Just the quiet confirmation that we were where we needed to be. The pedestal she'd been standing on had vanished, and now she was forced to look at the ground beneath her feet. No filters, no retweets, just real-world cause and effect. Then the 5th voicemail started. Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't mean what I said at dinner, okay? It was a stupid joke. Please, just can we talk? I paused, sat down, played it again. Her voice was softer, not performative. It sounded real, but I didn't call back. Not yet. I needed her to sit in the moment a little longer to understand that apologies didn't erase damage. They acknowledged it. And she'd never had to truly acknowledge what she'd done before. She just breezed through the consequences, always catching a safety net I quietly held beneath her. Not this time. The phone rang again. This time it wasn't Isla. It was Marissa. I debated whether to answer but decided against it. The voicemail came through seconds later. Gavin, what the hell did you do? She's sobbing. I just got off the phone with her RA and she's in her room crying because she can't get to class, can't pay for anything, and her friends are all asking why she's borrowing money. This isn't how you parent. There it was, the pivot. No concern for what got us here. No thought about how I felt the night before. No ownership of the poison she'd let grow between Isla and me. Just a spotlight turned back toward me as if I had committed some cardinal sin by finally saying enough. I played the message twice, not because I needed to hear it again, but because I wanted to make sure I didn't misinterpret the tone. There was no worry in her voice for my experience. No, it was panic because her version of the story, the glossy perfect mother of the year illusion, was cracking and cracks get noticed. I sat quietly for a few minutes staring at the wall above the fireplace. A photo of Isla and me at the lake 2 summers ago still hung there. She was laughing, really laughing, not that curated half-smile she gave her mom's camera. Her arm was around my neck and we were both drenched from a canoe mishap. It felt like a lifetime ago. Back then, Dorian was just mom's new friend, and I was still the person Isla called when she wanted advice on science projects or what kind of sneakers to get. Then came the yacht trips, the personal stylists, the rebranding of a child into a socialite. And now I was the problem. I shook my head and turned the phone over. The screen lit up again. Another message from Marissa. You're hurting her to make a point. That's not parenting. That's punishment. That one almost made me laugh. Not a real laugh, just a breath through the nose. The kind you make when irony hits too close to home. Because for years, I had watched my daughter get slowly pulled away from me, reprogrammed to see me as the lesser parent, if even a parent at all. And I let it happen. Why? Because I didn't want to be the one who made waves. I thought staying calm, being patient, would prove my love. But love isn't supposed to make you disappear. And now when I decided to reclaim my place, I was the villain. The night dragged on. The phone kept buzzing. More calls from Isla. More voicemails from Marissa. By the 9th message, Marissa's voice was afraid. You're seriously not going to respond? What are you trying to prove? That you're the bigger person? That you're in control now? She's still your daughter, Gavin. Even if she said something stupid, she's a kid. I turned off the phone and let the silence reclaim the room. This wasn't about control. It never had been. It was about visibility. It was about value. It was about not allowing love to become a one-sided currency that only flowed when I was useful. They could call it punishment if they wanted to. I called it a reset, a necessary one. And if Marissa didn't understand that, well, that wasn't new either. The next evening, I was making tea, no sugar, just green with a hint of lemon, when my phone buzzed with a blocked number. I almost let it ring out, but something in me said to pick up. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was instinct. Either way, I answered and said nothing at first, waiting to see who thought hiding their number would hide their agenda. Gavin. Hey, it's Marissa. Her voice came through smooth, tight, rehearsed. I stayed silent. She cleared her throat. Look, I know the last couple of days have been tense, but I think we should talk. Actually, I have Dorian on the line, too. Oh, there it was. I imagined her sitting in their penthouse kitchen, probably sipping imported wine, sliding the phone across the marble counter to her husband like they were running a boardroom. The same man Islak couldn't stop quoting. The same man who, for all his wealth and charm, had never once offered to pitch in for anything related to her education. Hi, Gavin, Dorian said, his voice a well-oiled version of sincerity. Look, I know things got heated, but I wanted to reach out man to man. Isla's upset. We all are. Really? I didn't answer immediately. I let him swim in that silence for a bit. Let it weigh on him the way his name had been weighing on me lately. Every dinner, every phone call, every subtle jab from my daughter that carried his fingerprints. I understand she said something hurtful, he continued. Teenagers say things. You know how it is. I said worse to my father at that age. She's not 16, Dorian, I said finally. She's 21, a college junior. She's old enough to rent a car and sign a lease. Words matter. A pause. Then his velvet voice returned. Of course. Absolutely. But I think we're all just looking for a way forward here. You've always been a great provider, and I think Islak just took that for granted. If we could maybe unfreeze the tuition, talk about the car situation. Maybe, I interrupted, you can pay her Ivy League tuition. There was a crack in his tone after that. Not loud, but enough. He didn't laugh. Didn't respond right away. Just that slight hitch of a man suddenly unsure where his feet were planted. That's not really something we planned for, he said, slower now. Marissa and I have joint commitments. We're investing in a development project in Tahoe. You know how it is, cash flow. And so no, I said. Another silence. Marissa jumped in, her voice clipped. Gavin, let's be adults about this. Isla's future is still secure, I replied. Calm as ever. She's not out on the street. Her education is still within reach. What's been paused is the part where she spits in my face while I pay her bills. You're blowing this out of proportion, Marissa snapped. No, I'm not, I said sharper now. I've sat through years of subtle digs of being quietly erased from her story because it was easier for you to let her align with a man who buys her designer bags but won't spend a dime on her degree. So, I asked him if he'd like to help. Turns out his generosity ends where his credit limit begins. Now, hold on, Dorian started the charm slipping. No, you hold on, I said. You walked into a family and thought your money gave you gravity. It didn't. It gave you distraction. You gave her gifts. I gave her grounding. And the second she decided one mattered more than the other, I adjusted accordingly. They were both quiet. I could almost hear them recalibrating on the other end, searching for the next angle. Dorian was the kind of man who always thought he could outtalk a problem. But this wasn't a negotiation. This was a consequence. And I wasn't interested in making him feel better about it. I'm not here to make Isla suffer, I added. I'm here to stop suffering in silence. She's just confused, Marissa tried. You're the stable one. You always have been. No, I said. I was the invisible one, the silent donor, the man who raised her to feel secure, only to be left in the background the moment someone shinier walked in. Dorian exhaled like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. I continued. Tell Isla this isn't about revenge. This is about recalibration. If she wants support, she'll have it conditioned on respect, honesty, and an actual relationship with me. Not just a credit stream. And the car? Marissa asked. Her voice cracked there. Just a little. It'll sit in my garage until I feel like she's earned it. That car was a gift built on years of showing up, but believing she valued what I gave. Turns out that belief was misplaced. I won't sell it, but I won't hand it back until something real shows up in its place. No one said anything after that. Anything else? I asked. Dorian cleared his throat again. No, I think that's clear. Good, I said, and I hung up before either of them could pivot the conversation again. I stood in the kitchen afterward, letting the silence settle back into the space like dust after a storm. My tea had gone cold. I didn't care. I leaned against the counter and stared out the window, watching dusk roll in over the tops of the neighbors' trees. Dorian, the man with the pocket square and private club memberships, had finally been called to the front. And he had nothing, not a dollar, not a plan, just smooth talk and shallow promises. And Isla, somewhere in her room, would now know that the man she'd held up like a gold-plated idol wouldn't lift a finger for her future when the moment required substance. That realization would come slowly, but it would come. And I didn't need to say another word. The email came at 8:13 a.m. sharp. No greeting, no warmth, just a subject line that read, legal notice, breach of verbal agreement. I didn't need to open it to know who sent it. Marissa had always been efficient with her threats, concise, sterile, and dressed up in official language to give her the illusion of power. But I clicked anyway, sipping my coffee as her words unfurled in full condescension. She accused me of violating an agreement, of disrupting Isla's education, of emotional coercion through financial control. Her phrasing was textbook manipulation, accusatory, and self-righteous. And then came the line that made me laugh out loud, nearly spilling my drink. You promised to pay for her college. That's on record. I leaned back in my chair, still in the robe. I hadn't bothered changing out of the robe she used to mock as Gavin's sad dad uniform back when she was still throwing verbal knives with a smile. I reread her email, shook my head, and then opened the digital folder I'd kept tucked away since the divorce, the one labeled custody and financial agreements. I found the clause in under a minute. Section 14.4, line 6. The undersigned agrees to fund the child's education provided mutual respect, cooperation in co-parenting, and continued contact is maintained. Clear as day, no ambiguity. I hadn't pulled this trigger on impulse. I wasn't reckless. I was deliberate, and I had proof. Every dollar I contributed, every boundary I drew, every moment I was excluded from her milestones while still footing the bill, it was all documented. Still, I wasn't about to go to war without reinforcement. I called Rena. Rena wasn't technically my aunt, but after my mother passed, she stepped in as a kind of emotional scaffolding. A former family court clerk turned part-time legal researcher, she knew her way around custody battles better than anyone I trusted. She also had zero tolerance for Marissa's games. I forwarded the email to her and 5 minutes later, she called back, already chuckling. She really sent this? Yep. Rena's sighed. She's banking on you folding. Old habits. She used to throw fits in court, too. Remember? Storming out when the judge didn't rule her way. She says, I'm using money to punish Isla. You're using money to enforce boundaries. Rena said, big difference. And the clause holds. I'll send it over to Patty. She's a paralegal with the MacArthur Group now. She'll look it over and confirm. But I'm telling you, Gavin, you're solid. Thanks. Also, she added, voice darkening with humor. Send Marissa a copy of the clause. Just that line. No commentary. Make her read it and stew. I laughed. Tempting. You need to remind her that your spine didn't dissolve in the divorce. You let her forget too long. We hung up. I drafted a response to Marissa's email. No emotion, no long explanations, just an attached PDF with the highlighted clause and one line beneath it. See section 14.4. Still applies. I clicked send. The silence that followed was immediate and glorious. For 2 whole days, there was nothing. No calls, no texts, no surprise messages from Isla. I imagine they were regrouping, probably sitting around Dorian's granite island trying to decide if they could afford to push this further. But they wouldn't because Marissa hated losing and going to court over this with evidence stacked against her. That would mean losing loud. And Judge Elbethwan. She didn't tolerate drama. She had ruled on our original agreement. Old school, clinical, sharp as a scalpel. I still remember her looking Marissa in the eye during one hearing and saying, custody is not ownership. Neither is support. You didn't play chicken with Beth Kwan. She'd steamroll you in a paragraph and never blink. I started sleeping better after that. Not because things were resolved, but because I wasn't bracing for the next blow. The weight had shifted. I no longer felt like the defendant in my own story. I was reclaiming authorship slowly, quietly. One afternoon, I opened a drawer in my office and found a photo strip of Isla and me from a booth at the state fair. She was maybe 11. Her braces had just come in and she hated smiling, so I made funny faces to get her to laugh. I stared at it for a long time, then tucked it into my wallet behind my license. I hadn't looked at that photo in years. That same evening, a text arrived from Marissa. Short, cold, the kind she reserved for when she had no more leverage. Received. Will not pursue further. That was it. No apology, no attempt at resolution, just a white flag dressed as a statement. I replied with a single word. Understood. I didn't need her to bend. I just needed her to back off. The following morning, I got a message from Patty, Rena's paralegal friend. She confirmed the clause was airtight and even offered to file a protective stipulation if Marissa tried any more legal harassment. I declined for now, but I appreciated the backup. I stood on my porch that afternoon, coffee in hand, staring out at the old oak tree I used to climb. I remembered how she once got stuck up there, cried until I brought the ladder out and climbed up myself to bring her down. She had clung to me like I was the only person who could keep her from falling. I missed that little girl. I didn't know if I'd ever get her back. Not completely. But I wasn't going to keep enabling the version of her that treated me like a doormat. Love didn't mean unconditional access to your self-worth. And if it took freezing tuition, reclaiming the Audi, and enduring courtroom threats to reattach that, then so be it. I hadn't started the war. But I sure as hell wasn't going to lose it by staying silent. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't ask for music or TV to fill it. It just held space. And for once, I let it. I stood in the hallway, fingers brushing along the worn edge of the picture frame that still held Isla's second-grade class photo. She was missing a front tooth in that picture, smiling so wide her eyes crinkled at the corners. Her tiny fingers were clutching a homemade paper crown labeled Star Reader. I used to come home from work early just to hear her read those books out loud, stumbling over big words, but never giving up. I remember the way she'd look at me like I knew everything. That look had been gone for a while now. Her silence this time was different. Not petty, not performative, just absent. No new texts, no passive-aggressive messages forwarded through her mother. No veiled quotes on her social media, just blank space. And then that morning, a ping. A simple message that blinked onto my phone screen like it wasn't carrying the weight of 1,000 cracked pieces. I didn't mean it, Dad. I was just mad. I stared at it for a long time. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't respond right away. What do you say to that? Where do you even begin? Minutes later, another message. I feel like I messed everything up. That one hit deeper. Not because it fixed anything, but because it didn't pretend to. There was no blame shifting. No, you took it wrong or I was joking. Just 4 words that acknowledged her part. 4 words I never thought I'd hear from her. I sat on the edge of my bed, the phone still in my hand, and opened the old keepsake box I kept tucked away in the bottom drawer of my nightstand. Inside were photos from her 4th birthday, icing smeared across her cheeks as she wore a cardboard crown, a crumpled middle school science fair ribbon that read, "Honorable Mention," in gold letters, the letter she wrote me at age 10 that began, "Dear Dad, I think you're better than Batman." I had saved it all. And yet somewhere along the way, I had let myself become invisible. Not out loud, not all at once. It started with cancelled weekend visits because of school projects, then vacations she no longer had time for. Phone calls that turned into one-word replies, and finally full silence, broken only when a bank transfer failed or a payment needed authorizing. That's what I'd become, a contingency plan. And now the words I'd been waiting for came dressed in shame instead of defiance. I picked up the photo of her holding that science fair ribbon. Her braces freshly installed and her expression one of stunned pride. I remembered how she'd called me from the school hallway that day. Her voice beaming through the phone. I didn't win, but I didn't quit. Dad, you were right. Back then, I was the first person she ran to with good news. The first one she needed. And no, now she had Dorian with his watch that cost more than my car and his words that rolled off the tongue like sales pitches. She had Marissa, the master curator of image and presentation. And yet, when it all fell apart, when the money stopped, the Audi vanished, the tuition froze. It wasn't them she texted. It was me. Because under the branded sheen and boutique veneers, she still knew who'd been the constant, the dependable, the fixer. I didn't reply right away. I wanted the silence to settle around her the way it had settled around me for years. Let it do what words couldn't. But I needed her to know I saw her message. That it didn't disappear into the void like mine so often had. So I wrote, I know. That's it. I didn't say it's okay because it wasn't. I didn't say don't worry about it because she needed to. I said I know because she needed to feel seen, acknowledged without being absolved. Later that night, I made tea and sat on the back porch. The wind had picked up, pushing dry leaves across the deck in little spirals. It was the kind of evening that usually made me feel lonely, but not this time. This time, I felt something else, something quieter, like peace in transit. She texted again. Do you still have the car? I smiled. That was law, half apology, half negotiation. The bridge builder trying to secure safe passage back. Yes, I replied a beat later. Do you think I could earn it back? It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a plea. It was a question rooted in accountability. Maybe, I wrote. But you'll have to show me how much it means to you. She didn't text back right away, but when she did, it wasn't about the car. I miss when things weren't so weird between us. I stared at that message for a long time. I typed, deleted, retyped. Me, too. But weird can get better if we both work on it. No reply came that night, but I didn't need one. I went inside, turned off the lights, and for the first time in months, slept without checking my phone every hour. The next morning, I woke up to one last text. I want to fix this, Dad. I don't know how yet, but I want to. That was all I needed. Not a performance, not a polished apology, just intention. She'd chipped the ice herself. And the girl in the crown, the one who thought I was better than Batman, she was still in there somewhere. And now she was trying to come back. The call came just before noon. I was standing in the garage wiping my hands clean after rotating the tires on my old Civic. Something I hadn't done in years, mostly because I hadn't needed to. But that morning, I felt like fixing something, even if it was just rubber and bolts. The phone rang and I froze when I saw her name, Isla. My thumb hovered over the answer button. I could feel the ghosts of our last conversation standing in the room like silent judges. The version of her that sat across the dinner table, dripping contempt. The voice that called me a poor loser in public, but also the kid who used to call just to tell me she aced a quiz or needed help with her resume. The one who asked for my pancakes every birthday. I took a breath and answered, hey. There was a pause on the other end, then the sound of her exhaling, hi, Dad. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered, not weak, just stripped of the layers she usually wore to sound older, cooler, more like the curated version of herself that lived online. This was Isla with the filter off. I'm sorry, she said. I really am. I sat on the edge of the workbench and said nothing at first. I wanted her to speak without being rescued. She continued. I didn't mean what I said. I was mad and I knew it would hurt and I said it anyway. I thought you'd just take it. You always take it. That part hit. She didn't mean it as a compliment, but it told the truth. I had taken it for years. The dismissals, the slow erasure, the way she and Marissa rewrote history like I'd only ever been a silent shadow. I'd absorbed it all, hoping things would swing back, hoping love meant never having to force respect. I would have, I said quietly. Until you made me invisible. There was a long silence after that. Then she said, I didn't realize I was doing that. I know, I replied. But that's the problem. You didn't realize because you didn't have to. I made it too easy. Her voice cracked. I feel like I messed everything up. No, I said, not to comfort her, but to correct her. You messed up. Not everything. And you're still my daughter. But we don't get to skip the hard part just because we love each other. She sniffled, and I could tell she was crying. Not performative tears. The quiet kind. The kind you cry alone in your dorm room when the armor slips. I miss you, she said. I swallowed hard. Then let's fix it together. But it has to be real this time. No more calling when something breaks or when you need a check. I want a relationship, not a transaction. She was quiet again. Then, okay, what does that look like? I stood, walked back into the house, and sat down at my desk. I pulled out a sheet of paper. I'm going to help with your tuition, I told her because I still believe in your future. But the Audi stays here for now. And the student card won't be renewed yet. We're going to start over. You're going to earn them. I expected resistance. Maybe a groan. Maybe a quick. You're being dramatic. But none of that came. Instead, she said, okay. I blinked. Really? Yeah, she whispered. I think I need to. Later that day, I emailed her a written agreement, not legal, just symbolic. A contract between a father and his daughter. It had 3 points. 1. Respect is the baseline, not a reward. 2. We speak honestly, even when it's hard. 3. No more Dorian praise sessions at my expense. She signed it within the hour. Marissa texted later that night, so she told me about your little contract. Controlling much? I stared at the message, then deleted it. I didn't need her validation. I wasn't negotiating with her anymore. She could stay in her corner of curated narratives and glass countertops. Isla texted the next morning. I read it again. I want to keep it in my drawer. She'd printed it. Physically, that meant something. The days that followed weren't suddenly magical. She didn't call every hour or send me morning selfies, but she checked in. A real check-in. Hey, Dad. How was your meeting? Kind of message. Do you still have that chili recipe? Kind of call. And that meant more than the Audi ever could? One night, she sent me a photo. It was of the two of us at the beach when she was 9. I was tossing her into the air and she was mid-laugh, mid-flight. Her caption read, I didn't realize how safe I used to feel. I want to get that back. I stared at the image until my eyes stung. She was trying, and so was I. Not as the bank, not as the background, but as her father, which meant this was only the beginning. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it got after Marissa stopped texting. Not just in the literal sense. No more unsolicited opinions on my parenting. No more veiled insults, but something deeper, like the static had finally cleared, and I could hear my own thoughts again. It was strange being left alone without being ignored. For years, I'd been present in Isla's life, yet treated like an intruder. But now that the dust had settled and her calls were consistent, her words less curated, I knew we had crossed a threshold. Rena was the first to say it out loud. Finally. Boundaries, she said, her voice crisp with satisfaction as we sat on her front porch sipping ginger beer. You've been running a charity for too long, Gavin. This is the first time I've seen you run your household like a man who knows his value. I grinned. It only took losing the Audi, freezing tuition, and a meltdown at a linguine dinner. She smirked. Whatever it took. That afternoon, I drafted a final message to Marissa. Not an invitation for more debate, not another volley in a long history of passive-aggressive co-parenting. Just a line in the sand, something clear, something I could stand on regardless of her response. Marissa, this will be my last message. Unless it's about Isla's immediate health or safety. No more games. No more sabotaging co-parenting. No more loyalty tests. If you want Isla to thrive, don't poison her against me again. I hovered over the send button for a moment, then tapped it. I didn't expect a reply, but a reply came. One word, understood. Short, frosty, but controlled. And that told me more than a paragraph ever could. She knew she'd lost control of the narrative. She knew the Gavin she used to roll over with clever digs and condescending smirks wasn't the man on the other end of the screen anymore. And Dorian, the $sign in designer shoes. I hadn't heard from him since the call, no emails, no voicemails, not even a vague threat to reconsider Isla's living situation. Silence. I imagined it aided him not being able to spin his usual charm into another fix. For all his charisma, he never stepped up when it mattered. Isla had learned that too. She told me during one of our calls. He said this was between you and Mom, that he didn't want to get involved. Did that surprise you? I asked. There was a pause on her end a little, but not really. He's good at speeches, not follow-through. That's when I knew she was seeing him clearly. Finally, the pedestal had cracked. She wasn't angry about it. She was adjusting. Her tone wasn't bitter. It was grounded. In the weeks that followed, Isla kept her side of the agreement. She called every 3 or 4 days. Nothing elaborate, just checking in. Sometimes she'd ask questions about how to negotiate a group project. Other times, she'd tell me about a tough day or about a professor who gave a vague midterm rubric. She even asked if I still had that old bookshelf we built together during her freshman year. Said she missed having something in her dorm that felt like home. I found it in the basement, dusted it off, and drove it over myself. She met me outside her dorm in sweatpants and messy hair, no makeup, no phone in hand, just Isla, the one I used to know. She helped me carry the bookshelf upstairs, and we didn't say much while we did it. But after we set it down and she began sliding her books into place, she said something I'll never forget. Thanks for not giving up on me. I looked at her for a long second. Thanks for making it worth it. We didn't need more than that. Not that day. After I got home, I sat on the back porch and watched the sun dip below the fence line. There were no new texts from Marissa, no veiled threats from lawyers, just the kind of quiet that means things are working again. Even if the repair is still in progress, I had set the new standard, not just for Isla, but for myself. No more invisible parenting. No more pretending that peace means silence. I wasn't here to be convenient. I was here to be consistent. There's a difference. The next morning, I emailed Isla's school and confirmed the tuition payment. I didn't do it with fanfare. I didn't announce it to her. I just did it because that's who I am. The dad who shows up. The one who pays for the roof. Yes. But also the one who expects the walls to stand up in return. Later that week, I got a text from her. Mom told me you sent her a message. She's been really quiet. I typed back. Good. That means she's thinking. A minute later, you're different now. In a good way. I see it. I smiled at the screen. So are you. I'd spent years thinking love meant giving without asking. That parenting was sacrificing silently without expecting even basic respect in return. But I was wrong. Love is a standard. Respect is a baseline. And this was the beginning of something stronger, something earned. Because Isla wasn't just coming back to me. She was becoming someone I wanted to know again. The Audi sat under a gray tarp in my garage like a forgotten trophy. Every Saturday morning, I pulled it back halfway, just enough to check the tires, wipe the windshield, and run the engine for 10 minutes so the battery wouldn't die. I kept it clean. Not out of nostalgia, but because I still believed in what it could symbolize. Not entitlement, not reward, but restoration. Earned restoration. The first time Isla asked about it, it was in passing. We were on a video call, her hair in a messy bun, no makeup, no filter. She was in her dorm room, hunched over a chemistry book. I could see sticky notes everywhere behind her. And for the first time, it looked like a space she actually lived in, not one curated for social media. So, she said, eyes flicking down. Do you still have the car? I smiled faintly. Still in the garage? She hesitated, then nodded. Do you think I could? I mean, maybe by summer, I said, leaning back. We'll see. She didn't push. That alone told me how much had shifted. The old Isla would have thrown a fit, called me dramatic, maybe even looped her mother in to make it a spectacle. But this Isla, this version of my daughter, was learning how to ask without assuming. And that, more than any apology, was what I'd been waiting to see. Since the contract, the agreement we wrote together, things had slowly changed. She was using the campus shuttle now or walking, said it made her more aware. She even joked once that it's kind of nice not relying on something with leather seats and Wi-Fi to feel important. That made me chuckle. She was starting to get it. She came home twice that month, not for a holiday, not for a birthday, just because. The first time she helped me fix the porch railing. It had been loose for a year, maybe more, and I'd gotten used to just stepping over the creaky part, but she noticed it the moment she arrived. And to my surprise, she said, "Do you still have your tool set? Let's fix that." No eye rolls, no sighs, just sleeves rolled up, sawdust on her jeans. And the two of us working together again like we used to when she helped me assemble her bookshelves or paint her old bedroom walls coral blush. While we worked, she told me about a paper she was writing on media ethics, about how influencers blur the lines between real and staged, and how dangerous it is when people start believing their own branding. She didn't say Dorian's name. She didn't have to. I could hear him in every beat of her analysis. She was starting to see the man not as a role model, but as a blueprint for what not to become. He got annoyed. She told me quietly when I started calling you more. That sentence landed hard. I put down the drill and looked at her. Annoyed? She shrugged. He said I was being manipulated, that you were playing some kind of long game. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. Did he now? She looked at me seriously. It bothered me because I realized he doesn't actually know you. He just sees you through mom's stories. And I did too for a long time. I wanted to ask what those stories were, but part of me already knew. The narrative of the quiet ex-husband who never fought, who showed up with checks but not opinions. The safe one, the one she could frame however she liked because he never said no. I'm trying to unlearn some of that, Isla said softly. I think I believed it because it made things easier. Simpler. That's how stories work, I replied. They flatten people, but real love's not flat. She nodded, pulling at a loose thread on her sleeve. It feels like you're a lot more present now. I had to be, I said, because the alternative was disappearing entirely. After we finished the railing, I made us dinner. Pasta, garlic bread, roasted vegetables. She offered to set the table, something she hadn't done since middle school. No phones, no photos, just the clink of forks, and the occasional laugh over a memory we hadn't shared in years. She stayed the night, took the guest room without asking, and in the morning when I came down, she was sitting at the kitchen table in one of my old hoodies, drinking coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world. It reminded me of the years before the divorce, before the rift. Back when mornings weren't something we had to plan in advance. A week later, she came back again, this time with groceries. Her own. Said she wanted to cook for me. You always cooked for me, she said. I figured it was my turn. She made spicy noodles and overcooked the chicken, but I ate every bite. That night, after she left, I went into the garage and pulled the tarp off the Audi completely. I cleaned it thoroughly, waxed it, checked the fluids, the battery, the tire pressure. I didn't know when I'd give it back, but I knew we were getting closer. Each visit was a brick laid slowly across a bridge. We were both walking across, this time toward each other. And yet, I kept the keys in the drawer, not as punishment, but as a reminder that respect, once broken, takes time to rebuild. I started noticing other changes, too. She texted just to say goodnight sometimes. She sent me links to articles she thought I'd like. She even asked if I could look over her resume. One afternoon, I got a call from her RA. Apparently, Isla had volunteered to help lead a peer support group on campus. Something about navigating toxic family narratives and finding your own voice. The irony wasn't lost on me. When I asked her about it, she said, I'm not doing it because of you. I'm doing it because of me. But yeah, you're part of the reason I finally wanted to. That meant more than she knew. The car stayed in the garage week after week, but every time she came by, she'd glance at it. Never asked, just looked. And I could tell it wasn't the car she wanted. It was the full circle moment. She wanted to know she had earned her way back. Not through perfection, but through presence. So, when she came by with groceries and her laptop one Saturday afternoon, I watched her move around the kitchen like she belonged again. She opened the cabinet, grabbed the olive oil without asking where it was. She told me about a friend who was going through a breakup and how she realized how differently she used to respond to pain. I'd always just shop, she said. Distract myself with something shiny. And now, I asked. She shrugged. Now I try to sit with it. Call someone. Write it down or just show up. I reached into the drawer by the sink, pulled out the Audi keys, set them on the counter beside her cutting board. She stared at them, then up at me. I haven't finished earning them, she said. I shook my head. You already did. Not by being perfect, but by being real. She didn't move to take them right away. She wiped her hands on a towel, blinked fast like she didn't want to cry in front of me, and then finally picked them up. Thank you, she whispered, for not giving up on me. I smiled. Thank you for coming back. The Audi in the garage wasn't just a car. It was a measure of trust. And that night, when I heard the engine start and watched her drive down the street, windows down, hair in the wind, it didn't feel like a return to who she used to be. It felt like the beginning of who she'd decided to become. It was a Friday afternoon when Isla showed up at my door with takeout and a book tucked under her arm. I wasn't expecting her, but I didn't need to ask why she came. Some arrivals don't require explanation. They just feel right. I opened the door and there she was, wrapped in a navy coat I hadn't seen before. A familiar crooked smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. You always liked these, she said, holding up the bag that carried the unmistakable scent of Sichuan chili oil and jasmine rice. From that little spot you used to drive 30 minutes for. I stepped aside, gesturing her in. Still unbeatable. She walked in without hesitation, like she belonged. Again, that mattered more than anything she could have said. No hesitation, no nervous glances around the room like she was trespassing on something she once left behind. It was comfort. It was home. She moved into the kitchen like she'd never stopped knowing where things were. Set the food down on the counter, popped open the containers, and pulled 2 plates from the cabinet. I didn't say a word. I just watched her, letting the moment settle around us like dust in a beam of late sunlight. Then she held up the book. It had a dark blue cover in gold embossed letters. Introduction to Mechanical Systems, I read aloud, eyebrows lifting. Engineering? She shrugged, but there was something in her eyes. Something steady. I've been thinking about it. I know I've always leaned toward media, but it always felt performative, like I was acting like someone who loved it, not someone who actually did. And engineering? I asked. Her voice softened. That part of my brain feels honest. Like when I was little and we used to fix the toaster together or take apart the remote just to see how it worked. I remember the way you always talked about systems, not just machines, but people, too. That caught me off guard. I'd said things like that in passing, sure, but I never knew they landed. She handed me a pair of chopsticks. I figured if I'm going to build something real, I might as well start with something that doesn't care about clout or filters. Machines don't lie. We sat at the table, steam rising from the food, and talked about her classes, about how she'd met with an academic advisor to start the transfer process into a dual-track program that would let her pivot into mechanical engineering with a media minor. It was ambitious. It was focused. And most of all, it was hers. No influence from Marissa. No stage suggestions from Dorian. Just Isla choosing. It was nearly sunset when she reached across the table and touched the Audi keys, resting in a quiet pile beside the salt shaker. She didn't pick them up. She didn't make a show of it. She just brushed her fingers across them gently. I haven't driven it much, she said. Just a class, groceries, that kind of thing. That's all it's for, I said. You don't have to earn it twice. I know. She looked up at me, but I needed to hold off. I needed to make sure I was different first. I studied her for a moment. Her posture, her voice, the calm in her gaze. This wasn't just about a car. It never had been. It was about who she was when no one else was watching. And she had changed. Not in some overnight epiphany, but in the slow, uncomfortable, beautiful way that real growth takes root. Do you think I'll always be playing catch-up? She asked quietly. I shook my head. No, I think you're exactly where you're supposed to be. She teared up a little, but didn't look away. You were the only one who made it safe to come back. You were always welcome, I said, but I couldn't keep welcoming a version of you that didn't respect what I gave. I get that now. We sat in silence for a while. She reached into the takeout bag and handed me a fortune cookie. Mine read, "The path to peace is through ownership of the past." She laughed. Okay, that's eerie. I smiled. Sometimes cheap paper is more honest than people. She broke hers open. I didn't ask what it said. I figured if it mattered, she'd share. Later, we moved to the living room. She curled up on the couch with a throw blanket, her book in her lap, flipping through the first chapter. I leaned back in my recliner, watching the room shift back to something familiar. It wasn't just her presence. It was the absence of tension. For once, I didn't feel like I was hosting someone I needed to impress or educate. I was sitting beside someone I knew and who knew me. She glanced up. Do you think it's weird how things ended with Dorian? I raised an eyebrow. Ended. She nodded. He and Mom are separating. She hasn't told many people yet. I exhaled. I didn't know. He blamed her for letting me turn against him, she said, eyes rolling. He said he wasn't going to compete with some deadbeat dad. I snorted. I didn't realize I was in a competition. You weren't, she said simply. Not to me. Not anymore. We didn't dwell on it. I could see she wasn't mourning the relationship. She was shedding it like dead skin that had grown too tight. She was lighter now. And maybe Marissa was starting to see what happens when you try to build permanence on performance. We talked for another hour about her plans, about the summer internship she was eyeing, about how she wanted to start building something, really building. She talked less about brands now, more about impact. And when she spoke about the future, she used we more than I. Before she left, she stood in the doorway, keys in hand. I know I said this already, she said. But thank you for not giving up on me, even when I deserved it. I shook my head. You didn't deserve abandonment. You deserve to be held accountable. There's a difference. She nodded. I'm starting to understand that. As she turned to leave, she paused. You know what I realized? What? That love without respect isn't love. It's just convenience. That stopped me. It was something I'd thought in 100 different forms, but never said out loud. And you're not convenient, Dad, she added. You're necessary. I watched her pull away in the Audi, taillights flickering as she turned out of the driveway. She didn't blast music. She didn't peel off in some dramatic flourish. She drove like she had somewhere to go and knew how to get there. I walked back inside, stood at the kitchen sink, and looked at the empty takeout containers. A year ago, I would have thrown them away, feeling like something was missing, that the evening had only masked the growing distance. But now I felt full. Not because everything was perfect, but because what was broken had finally been addressed, faced, owned. Isla hadn't come back to me as a daughter who needed saving. She came back as a young woman who understood what I'd been trying to teach her all along. That respect isn't a gift you give out of obligation. It's a bond you build with consistency, humility, and time. That love, real love, can't thrive in entitlement. And that sometimes the people who seem the quietest are the ones who loved you the loudest all along.